Hi, everyone, and welcome to the Wise Body Podcast, where we talk about eating disorder recovery and all things body. I'm your host, Dr. Sarah Hughes. I bring 20 years of experience as an eating disorder therapist, and I've worked with hundreds of clients to feel more empowered and connected to their body by tapping into the wisdom it holds. I'm so excited to keep learning with you as we navigate the windy path that is recovery. So let's get started. Hi, and welcome to the very first episode of the Wise Body Podcast. I'm your host, Dr. Sarah Hughes, and I'm so glad you're with me. I thought I would pop on here real quick to start a podcast. Just kidding. I've been thinking about doing a podcast for a really long time, and many people I know have podcasts. And then last year, I listened to the very first episode of the Mel Robbins podcast, and that was a turning point for me as she shares a consistent message to go out and get it. And so here we are. And P.S. Mel, if you are listening, I'd love to do a pod swap. I thought I would start by sharing a little bit about me and why I decided to start the Wise Body podcast. So I grew up in Hartford, Connecticut, and my parents lived in the same house for 42 years. And I recognize my privilege in being white, cisgendered, able-bodied, educated, and growing up in a middle-class family where we went to good schools and had access to all the resources that we needed. I loved school, and I think that's why I went to school for so long, 9 years of grad school to be exact. And I have a feeling that a question I plan to commonly ask my future guests is, what is your most frequently asked question, and how do you answer it? And by the way, please send your questions to me, as I plan to have episodes where I answer them, and I think that'll be really fun. So one of my most frequently asked questions is, why did you become an eating disorder therapist? And it truly wasn't the straightest path, and serendipity definitely played a role. I thought I wanted to be a school psychologist, and I was encouraged to be in the classroom. So I majored in education, and then I went back for psychology. And I planned to go straight through getting my master's and right into my doctorate. But the doctoral program that I got into, the first time I applied, lost funding. So I had to reapply. And after the next rounds of applications, I applied to the University of Miami and I got waitlisted. And some of you may know this, the deadline for, and I don't know if it's still the same way as it was almost 20 years ago. The deadline for notifying accepted students is April 15th, tax day. So I got a call on April 15th from UM and from the director of the program, and he let me know that I was number 9 on the wait list. So, okay, yeah, there's no chance then. But to my surprise, he actually told me that they had contacted number 8 and were waiting to see if they were going to accept or decline the offer. And if they declined, I could go. I would be granted a spot. And to my deep disappointment, they accepted. Number 8 accepted. And I think I know who you are, but I won't name names. We are small cohorts. I think only 6 to 8 students in each cohort. We get to know each other really well. But I was encouraged to apply the next year, and I did, and I got in, and then I deferred. I wasn't quite ready to make the big move to Miami, but then I finally did. But then that year, I found myself unemployed and not a student anymore, and I had to find a job. So a friend of mine had mentioned to me that she worked at McLean Hospital, the Carmen Eating Disorder Unit, and there were positions open and that I should just apply. And I thought, hey, just give it a shot. What else am I going to do? So those were the days when you would go for the interview and then you were hired on the spot, start the next day, the following Monday, whatever it was. And that's what I did. And I know this might sound strange, but I fell in love with it. I fell in love with being on the front lines, as they say. I was a mental health counselor. And I was because it's a medical setting, we refer to the residents as patients, and I was with them all the time during meals in their darkest moments, celebrating successes, running groups, going on outings. It was really an honor to be a part of their journeys as they tried to get well. I also was a part of a multidisciplinary team. So there was a team of psychiatrists, nurses, psychologists, social workers, and mental health counselors. And we would attend rounds and give our reports. And what we shared was important, and it affected our patients' treatment. And so I really, really value that job. And I think it led me to continue to work in the field of eating disorders, write my dissertation on eating disorders in athletes, and devote my career to this. So back to school, I started in 2007 at the University of Miami for my doctorate. I thought I would finish in 4 years, maybe 5. It took 7. That's postmasters. And part of why it took so long was because I did a 2-year internship. I was in a long distance relationship at the time, and it took me a few years to write my dissertation, which, I hope to dive into that topic in a future episode, eating disorders in athletes, and I can share my dissertation research and hopefully invite some guests on to talk about that topic. And at the University of Miami, I also was really fortunate to join a really awesome research team. Shout out to Dr. Kemp Burnett, if you are listening. He was already working with athletes, and so we studied the interplay of athletes, eating disorders, and coaching messages. So again, future episode. Finally, I graduated in 2014, which is crazy that was 11 years ago, this spring. But I did it. I'm so glad that I did. But I need to interrupt this story to note the sacrifice that it takes to be in school for so long. Those of you who are in school or applying to school, I see you. It's one of my most favorite things to talk about, applying to grad school, and also if you're thinking about going into the field of psychology. So reach out if you want to talk more about that. So I was really focused on myself during that time in grad school, the next paper, the next exam, comprehensive exams, internship, dissertation, all of the hurdles. So I wanted to dedicate this first episode. I don't even know if that's a thing, but I'm going to do it. I want to dedicate this first episode to my parents. Their financial and emotional support was unwavering. They called me before every exam to wish me luck. They called me after to see how it went. They championed me through all of school, always believing in me and saying that they were proud. And I am a saver of messages, and so I wanted to play this message if you can hear it. This is just one example of messages I would get basically weekly.
Hi, Sarah. It's Mom.
Hi, Sarah.
And we're just calling to wish you good luck tomorrow. It's about 8:30. If you get this message and feel like calling us, you can call us till, say, 9:30 or so. But we're thinking of you, praying for you, and good luck. And we have faith in you.
Good luck, Sarah. Love you.
Sorry, cut my dad off. He said, love you lots. And we always end every phone call that way. I'm not going to get emotional on episode 1, but I really love my parents, value them so much. They're the best. So on to the reason for the Wise Body podcast. This is kind of the second part of this first episode. I know that this is not the first nor the last podcast about eating disorder recovery and body health. I want to be a part of a group who are talking about eating disorders and how we treat our bodies. We need more people talking about it. So if I'm just one more, that's great. Pushing the health at every size and every food fits mentality is really important. And it's also why I chose debunking the top 5 eating disorder myths as my first topic. So it seems just like a great place to start. There are more than 5, by the way, but I see these coming up the most in my practice. So we may have another episode of 5 more myths, 10 myths. There are hundreds. And also feel free to send those in to me too, and we can talk about them. So in every episode, I will present what I call the Wise 5, which hopefully you will think of as 5 wise takeaways. So let's begin with number 1. Myth number 1, that it's a phase or a fad. So a huge inspiration of mine is Margot Main. She's actually the very first guest on the next episode. She's my first guest on the Wise Body podcast, which is episode 2. 40 years ago, she was discouraged from becoming an eating disorder psychologist, as her mentors told her it was just a phase, not a niche. And I'm so glad that she didn't listen, because she is one of the best. She wrote a book called Body Wars 20 years ago, and I recently reread it, partly to put fire under my butt to get podcasting, but also because what she talks about is so relevant. So I'm just going to read a little part from her book. It's actually the first page. So, and by the way, side note, she references women, but she and I both agree that eating disorders don't discriminate and they affect all genders. So just keep that in mind as I read. Most women in westernized cultures are waging war against their natural bodies. Ours is not the first culture to maintain ideals for beauty. Every place and time has evolved its own prototype to emulate. But in our society, people are drastically altering themselves to reflect the recognized standard. For that, physical appearance must be valued as the ultimate achievement and representation of the self. Considerable technology and resources must be devoted to changing the human body, and the economy must market these ideals. Such is the case in 20th century Western culture. In fact, the past 100 years has been an epic of unrelenting attacks on women's bodies and self-confidence, what I call the body wars. Their tactics render women insecure and dependent on the latest product, technique, or trend by convincing them that their ultimate value is their appearance. The body wars are systematic, institutionally sanctioned, and economically driven. They're insidious and ubiquitous. They obliterate any respect our society has for women or a woman has for herself. In essence, body wars keep women in their place. So there is this unrelenting pressure from diet culture and the multi-billion-dollar beauty industry. Don't get me wrong, I love to look my best, although these days I'm lucky to shower and get out of sweats having 2 little kids at home. But it goes beyond just looking and feeling our best. It's about accepting who we are. But instead, our culture promotes such an inconceivably high standard paired with not enough help, leading to a pervasive sense of inadequacy, which then leads to so many people dying to attain the unattainable. In fact, someone dies every 52 minutes from an eating disorder. Diet talk permeates our culture, and it doesn't have to be a normal way of life that we just accept. So my second myth, which I already mentioned, is that eating disorders do not discriminate. They affect all races, ethnicities, genders, socioeconomic status. People with food scarcity struggle with eating disorders. I've met many of them. That's something that I think a lot of people are surprised by, that even if people don't have easy access to food, why and how could they ever possibly have an eating disorder? It's not necessarily about the food. There's a saying in the eating disorder field that eating disorders are not about food. So on to number 3, this myth about being sick enough. So Dr. Jennifer Gaudiani, she's another friend and colleague of mine, wrote a book called Sick Enough, because she kept hearing that from her clients, that they didn't feel sick enough to warrant care and treatment. She heard from her clients invalidate their own eating disorder, or she heard about how the medical system invalidated them and their eating disorder. So she writes about medical issues that are hard to measure and thus diagnose and treat as a means to heal some of the damage and mistrust of self and doctors. And I am not bashing the medical field at all. Eating disorders are complex and they're tricky. Doctors don't necessarily have a lot of time, but it's important to ask the right questions. And that leads me to my last two myths. So number 4, having normal labs. I hear this a lot. My labs are normal, therefore I'm fine. My body is fine and functioning. I'm getting straight A's. I'm working full time. I'm juggling kids. I'm doing all of the things. I'm fine. It was actually during a talk that Margot Main gave years ago. She had said this. It's the first time I heard it, which is people with normal labs can die. And that is because our bodies, although they're so resilient, are having to overcompensate for lack of malnourishment. And so our organ systems are trying so hard to keep up with normal numbers, normal labs, and yet our bodies are really sacrificed and are struggling. And so I take labs as like a grain of salt. It's one piece of the puzzle. If I know that someone is engaging in eating disorders, that trumps the lab work if it is coming up as normal. My last myth is also medically related, and that is having a low heart rate, being dismissed as being a serious athlete. Because I work with a lot of athletes, I hear this a lot, that if your heart rate is in the 40s or the 50s, it just means that like your heart is in good health, and having a low heart rate is nothing to worry about. And I think that's a real disservice to clients because something else could be going on. And so it really makes sense to ask that question. What are you eating? Are you engaging in eating disorder behaviors? And there are ways to ask that, but sometimes in a direct way is also a good way too. And not that it's easy to talk about, but it's important to ask the questions. So I know I could go into more depth about each myth, and I likely will in future episodes. But for now, as I tell my clients as we approach the end of a session, I will hit the pause button and end with this. I value the realness one can bring to difficult topics, and I think it's important to talk about them. So let's please keep this conversation going. I hope you listen in on each episode and feel more informed and empowered. See you next week as I talk to my friend and mentor, Dr. Margot Main. Thank you so much for listening. Bye for now. Thank you, everyone, for taking the time to listen in this week. I'm so glad you're here with me as we learn more from our wise bodies and about eating disorder recovery. For more, follow me on social media, and please share the Wise Body podcast with your friends. Lastly, if you're interested in a free client consultation, please reach out on drhughes.com. And remember, always take care of yourself and your temple. See you next time on the Wise Body Podcast.